Hi, and welcome to The Regulated Mother. I'm your host, Afshan Tafler, nervous system resilience coach and mother of a hypersensitive, high-needs child. If you're raising a differently wired kid with PDA, autism, OCD, ADHD, or big emotional needs, this is a space for you. Here we talk about what most people don't, how it really feels, how your nervous system responds, and how to find your way back to calm, courage, and connection, even on the hardest days. You're not alone. Let's begin. There is no shortage of grief when you're parenting a hypersensitive, high-needs child. Grief for how hard it is for them, and grief for how hard it is for you. In part one of this three-part series, we explored the many invisible losses we face: the loss of identity, the loss of dreams, the loss of control, connection, joy, and freedom. But after the loss comes something even harder to face: the grief, the heavy, stuck, helpless feeling that lives in your body. Because grief isn't just sadness, it's a nervous system process. And when we understand that, it starts to make sense why everything feels so hard to move through. In today's episode, we'll explore the grief that most parents of high-needs children carry without even realizing it: grief for the loss of the life you imagined, the connection you hoped for, and the ease you thought you'd have, and how that grief shows up in hidden ways in your body, your thoughts, and your parenting, and how once you can finally name it, then you can begin to work with it. Because unspoken grief keeps your nervous system stuck, but understood grief can start to move. So I remember a time in a training years ago where they were talking about grief, and someone listed the 5 stages of grief that a person might go through when someone dies. And I remember thinking, wait a second, no one died, but I have felt every single one of these. And it's like something clicked into place for me. For the first time, I felt seen. I could understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling. Parenting my high-needs child at the time was so hard. I felt like my life was falling apart. I didn't want this life. I didn't want to be his mother anymore. I felt like I was dying inside, and I was cycling between anger, depression, and doing anything I could to try to change him. And I carried so much shame for feeling this way as a mother. I'm sure you can relate. But understanding grief, because there is no shortage of grief in parenting a high-needs child, and it always shows up, well, this understanding, it helped me to let go of some of that shame. And that's why I want to bring these stages to you now, so that if you felt any of these things, you can name it and allow it. And understand that you're not broken. You're not a bad mom who's not trying hard enough. You're a mom who is grieving, and this makes sense given the circumstances. So according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, there are 5 stages of grief, and these stages aren't linear, and you don't graduate out of them. But understanding them helps us meet ourselves where we are and know that what we experience is actually expected, okay? Like this kind of grief, it's expected. So keep in mind these 5 stages of grief were created for those who lost a loved one, but I have adapted them here to connect to our parenting experience of a high-needs child, because they totally relate when we think about how much loss we experience, even though it is more invisible, okay? So the first stage is denial. Denial helps us to survive the loss. It's a defense that buffers the initial shock. So in parenting, denial can sound like, this is just a phase, they'll grow out of it, or I just need to try harder and things will get better and be normal. Or it's not really a disability, they just need more discipline or the right environment. It's common to deny the diagnosis or to minimize the reality of how challenging it is because it feels too overwhelming to accept. It often shows up as us over-researching, over-efforting, or staying in your head to avoid the heartache. But this is your brain's way of buying time because accepting what's happening all at once would feel like too much. The second stage is anger. Anger is a necessary stage of healing. Underneath it is pain. Anger is the anchor giving you temporary structure to the nothingness of loss. So in parenting, anger might sound like, why is this happening to me? Why can't they just do better? Why is this so much harder for us than other families? It might be directed at your partner, your child, yourself, or the systems that have failed you. But underneath that anger is usually deep powerlessness, because no matter how much you try, you can't control how your child is wired or change the reality of their needs. This is your nervous system in fight mode, trying to protect you from helplessness and vulnerability. The third stage is bargaining. We try to negotiate with loss. If we do better, maybe the pain will stop. So in parenting, this can look like, oh, if I regulate better, they'll finally calm down. If I find the perfect therapy or medication, this will all go away. If I sacrifice everything, including all my needs, maybe things will be more normal. It's also common to bargain with the universe or God. I don't know about you, but I've been here. Please, God, please just make this easier, and I promise I'll do better. I promise I'll be more patient. I'll help other people. I'll never complain again. Bargaining gives us this false sense of control, but underneath it is fear that we'll never feel safe or secure or successful again. Then the fourth stage is depression. This stage feels like it will last forever. It's not a sign of mental illness, it's a natural response to loss. And in parenting, this might feel like, I can't do this anymore, or what's the point, or this isn't the life I wanted. It may show up as withdrawal, numbness, fatigue, and a feeling of being shut down. This is your system in freeze or collapse. But depression is also a protection against feeling the pain of the losses that you're experiencing. And then the fifth stage is acceptance. Acceptance is about acknowledging what is and learning to live in a way that integrates the loss rather than resists it. So in parenting, it may sound like, this is our life, and we're still a family worthy of love and joy. Or, it's not what I expected, but I can build a life that works for us. It doesn't mean giving up hope. It means giving up the fight against what is, letting go of resistance to what is. So this is where regulation becomes more available to you. You begin to move with your reality instead of against it. So acceptance is ultimately where we want to stay, because this is where life starts to feel more livable and like we are thriving instead of just surviving. But the reality is that we often cycle through the 5 stages over years because new challenges and new losses show up. So one of the hardest parts of this grief is that it doesn't just happen once. It happens again and again. And there's a name for this. It's called ongoing loss, or also called chronic sorrow. It's a term that was first introduced by Simon Olshansky to describe the repeated grief experienced by parents of children with disabilities. It's a kind of grief that revisits you every time your child struggles in a place that others thrive. Every time they're excluded from something you thought they'd be part of, every time they fall behind developmentally, or you watch their siblings adapt in ways that they can't. This grief doesn't resolve like a single event, it's cyclical. And because of that, it can feel like you're doing something wrong, like you should be over it by now. But you're not doing anything wrong. Your nervous system is simply responding to the reality that you're living in a continuous experience of loss, loss that evolves as your child grows and as new challenges arise even after progress was made. So that's why sometimes out of nowhere, you feel like you're drowning again. But you're not back at square one, okay? You're just revisiting the grief because there's a new layer of it that just arrived. So that's important to understand. Then, alongside ongoing loss, which we just talked about, there's another grief that's even harder to name, and it's called ambiguous loss. This term was coined by Dr. Pauline Boss, who studied the unique grief that occurs when there's no closure. So here's the definition. Ambiguous loss refers to a loss that is unclear, without closure, and often lacks a definitive ending. It can be characterized by either physical absence with psychological presence, like a missing person, or physical presence with psychological absence, like someone with dementia or a chronic illness or a mental illness. So this may not seem relatable, but here's how it is. It's the grief we feel when something or someone is still there, but not in the way we expected. So when your child is right in front of you, but not able to connect or communicate or relate in the way that you'd always imagined. When you're living the life of a parent, but it looks nothing like the parenting you dreamed about. So ambiguous loss is complicated. There's no funeral, no ritual, no support, so it often goes unacknowledged, which makes it harder to process. But when we name it, it gives us the chance to validate our experience, acknowledge what we've gone through, and finally begin to grieve it. And that grief, once it begins to move, can give us space to start feeling again. It can help us understand why it makes sense that we feel this way instead of being hard on ourselves for feeling that way. And then maybe, just maybe, give us a chance to heal it. Now, there's another form of grief that's rarely talked about, but it lives in the heart of so many parents I work with. And it's the grief of not receiving back the emotional connection you longed for. So you're giving everything you have, your love, your energy, your patience, and not getting the affection or the attunement or the closeness that you hoped for in return. This is especially common when your child has nervous system differences or diagnoses that impact connection, like autism, PDA, sensory processing differences, or trauma histories. And it's not your child's fault, and it's not your fault either. But it feels like a real loss because we are biologically wired for reciprocity. We expect that our love will be mirrored. And we even have like hormones in our body that when we give this love and it's mirrored, these hormones and these chemicals, get released that then motivate us to keep, engaging in that way. So we expect that our love will be mirrored, that our care will create connection, that our child will look into our eyes and light up, that we'll have shared joy and mutual delight. And when that doesn't happen, at least not in the way you imagined, it can feel like a part of you is grieving something invisible. And it doesn't mean you love your child any less. It means you're human, and it's okay to grieve this too. And then there's the grief of not fitting in, of feeling like you and your child don't belong in the places other families gather. You stop going to birthday parties, your child is excluded from school or activities, friendships change, support falls away. This kind of grief is rarely named. It's a loss of community, of visibility, of understanding. and it can make you feel painfully alone. But again, you're not alone in that feeling, okay? Many moms feel this way, and the grief is valid. But some grief isn't just about what's happening now. It's about what it awakens in you from the past. So today's grief is often layered. There's the visible layer of grief we have about our child's meltdowns or school refusals or aggression or withdrawal or not fitting in. But underneath that is another invisible layer. And this is more about what those experiences awaken in us or trigger in us from the past. So your child is violent, and this can feel intolerable, not just because it is hard to deal with, violent aggression from your child, but because your nervous system remembers what it was like to feel unsafe as a child. So you may have trauma from the past around that. Or your child's rejection or withdrawal might not just sting in the present, okay, but it might reawaken the wound of being unseen or unloved as a child. And when we can fix or when we can't fix or control what's happening now, it can bring up memories of helplessness from our own childhood. So that's the deeper truth. What feels like grief in the present can actually be our nervous system bringing up old pain from the past that never got to be processed. So when we feel overwhelmed, hopeless, or really sad now, it may not just be about what's happening in front of us. So the whole, what we're feeling is compounded by the past. Everything that's buried in us from the past is getting triggered in the present now. Okay, so when that unprocessed pain from the past surfaces, so does the shame, because that often comes along with it. There's shame programmed into us from those traumatic experiences as well. So grief says this is hard, but shame says you're failing. And many mothers get caught in this grief-shame loop. You grieve what's hard, then shame rises up for feeling grief at all. So you suppress it, which intensifies the grief. But grief is not a sign that you're a bad mom. It's a sign that you love, that you care, that you're impacted. And the more we name the grief, the less space that shame takes up. So sometimes the heaviest grief isn't about what's happened. It's about what might never happen. The milestones you fear your child won't reach. The future you imagine but can no longer count on. The ache of uncertainty. This is called anticipatory grief. It's grief for a future that feels fragile. It's why you might feel anxious even on good days, because your nervous system is bracing for that future. And naming this layer matters too, because this fear and the grief that goes with it can leave you pretty dysregulated and not able to stay in the present with your child. So as you can see, the grief you carry can be pretty loaded. It creeps up on you and hits you before you even know it. It masks itself automatically and gets buried, but your nervous system takes the brunt of it. And this unprocessed grief can keep your nervous system stuck, cycling between fight, flight, and freeze and shutdown. It is painful to feel all these losses and the grief that goes with it. But that pain is also a doorway, a chance to meet what's been buried, a chance to finally release it. And when we grieve both the present and the past and acknowledge the future we may not have, we stop seeing this experience as one long breakdown and start seeing the potential for breakthrough. So I want to invite you into a short reflection, because when we bring grief out of the shadows, out of the buried places in your nervous system, when we give it space to be felt, we begin to work with it instead of bracing against it or blocking ourselves from feeling it, which keeps the nervous system stuck. So take a moment right now to come back into your body. If it feels safe, place your hand on your heart or on your belly and just take one slow, gentle breath. And ask yourself, what have I lost? What grief might still be living inside me? Unfelt, unspoken, unseen. What part of me might be asking to be witnessed and not fixed? And when you feel the grief, perhaps you feel it in your chest, or in the heaviness in your body, or in the pressure behind your eyes, or the tears coming up in your throat. Can you be present with it, even for a few moments? Can you bring a compassionate feeling toward it? Place a hand on the part of your body that feels it. Notice how you feel this grief in your body. Notice if the tears want to come and be released from your body. And if it feels like too much, that's okay. You can bring yourself back to the present and safety by noticing and naming 5 to 10 things in the room around you and feeling your feet on the floor. You don't need to rush healing this grief. Just feel yourself here in this moment and let it be okay to feel, or let it be okay to not feel. Whatever is here is welcome. This is how grief begins to process, when we acknowledge and be with it with love and acceptance, bit by bit, breath by breath, with compassion. So coming up in part 3 of this podcast series on loss, grief, and growth, we'll talk about what comes after the grief, how trauma and loss, when met with compassion and clarity, can become a catalyst for growth, and how this parenting journey, while painful and unpredictable, can actually lead us into a life that's more aligned, more meaningful, and more honest than the one we were taught to chase. So we'll explore post-traumatic growth, nervous system resilience, and what it means to come home to yourself, even when nothing around you looks like you imagined. If this episode spoke to you, please leave a comment and let me know, and share it with others who could use this understanding too. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to The Regulated Mother. If this episode helped you feel a little more seen, grounded, or hopeful, I'd love for you to share it with another mom who might need it too. And if you want more nervous system tools and support, head to my website, illuminateyou.ca, to grab my free ebook and video series. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You're doing brave and meaningful work.